In the history of modern popular music, few names carry as much cultural weight as the Beatles. From their explosive rise in the early 1960s to their final recordings at the end of the decade, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr built a song catalog that was not only vast, but also fundamentally reshaped the direction of global pop music. Their songs were not merely hits, many became a universal emotional language, remembered across generations and still sounding relevant decades after their release. Interestingly, behind that nearly flawless reputation lies a story of artistic honesty that is rarely discussed. Because despite being celebrated as a band with the gold standard of creativity, the Beatles, or at least one of their main creative engines, never truly believed that every song they made was a masterpiece. That person was Paul McCartney. As one half of the most influential songwriting partnership in music history alongside John Lennon, McCartney was responsible for hundreds of songs that formed the foundation of modern pop. Memorable melodies, clever harmonic progressions, and lyrics that cut straight to the emotions are his trademarks. Yet McCartney is also known for being deeply reflective, even critical of his own work. He has openly admitted that not every Beatles song came from profound inspiration. Some of them, in his words, were simply album fillers. The term filler may sound harsh when applied to a band as monumental as the Beatles, but within the context of the 1960s music industry, it was a realistic assessment. Albums had to be released quickly, tours ran non-stop, and audiences demanded new material constantly. Under such pressure, songwriting was often less about waiting for inspiration and more about finishing the job on time. Two songs that McCartney has openly downplayed, Hold Me Tight and What You're Doing, both written during the peak of Beatlemania, when the Beatles' popularity surged far faster than their ability to pause and breathe. When the Beatles entered the studio to record their second album, With the Beatles, they had already become a national sensation in the UK. Their debut album had exploded commercially, fan hysteria was everywhere, and their record label demanded a follow-up as soon as possible. In a very short time, the band had to produce enough new material for a full LP. The result was an album that was widely praised, energetic, tight, and confident. Songs like All My Loving and Please Mr. Postman made it clear that the Beatles were not a fleeting phenomenon. Yet behind the spotlight, the creative process was driven by a highly practical mindset. Hold Me Tight was originally written with the hope of becoming a single, the most valuable currency in the music industry at the time. The ideal early 1960s pop song had to be short, direct, and radio-friendly. But after recording and evaluation, the track felt as though it lacked that extra something to set it apart. Instead of being discarded, it ultimately ended up on the album as filler. Years later, McCartney referred to it as an example of a song that was good enough but not special, a song that functioned rather than shone. This judgment does not mean the track lacks appeal. Many fans still enjoy its raw energy and driving rhythm, but for McCartney, it marked a moment when technical skill replaced pure inspiration. A similar story applies to What You're Doing, which appeared on the album Beatles for Sale.
Look what you're doing, I'm feeling.
The year 1964 was a major turning point. The Beatles conquered America, appeared on US national television, and transformed from British stars into a global phenomenon. Their schedule was near inhuman. International tours, interviews, film shoots, and recording sessions collided with no breathing room. That pressure is clearly reflected in the album's mood. Compared to their earlier work, Beatles for Sale feels darker and more introspective. Beneath massive commercial success, fatigue had begun to seep into their music. McCartney later admitted that What You're Doing was another song he considered filler. He explained that it leaned heavily towards his own style and emerged from a process that hoped magic would appear along the way, especially when reaching the chorus. Sometimes that magic arrived, In this case, he felt the final result only reached a level of competence. Interestingly, McCartney also noted that the recording sounded better than the composition itself. In other words, the arrangement, the band's performance, and studio production elevated material that was structurally fairly ordinary. This is an unusually candid acknowledgement of how performance and technology can mask limitations in a basic idea, offering valuable insight into the Beatles' early creative process. It is precisely this honesty that makes McCartney's reflections so compelling. Many legendary musicians choose to protect the myth of perfection. McCartney does the opposite. He acknowledges the highs and lows. This attitude shows that for him, artistic quality is always a moving target, not something frozen in the past. Admitting the existence of filler tracks does nothing to diminish the Beatles' achievements. On the contrary, it highlights just how extraordinary their creative peaks were. McCartney often cites songs he genuinely takes pride in, such as Here, There, and Everywhere from the album Revolver, a delicate ballad with intricate and elegant harmonies, an ideal example of their mid-1960s artistic leap. He also frequently mentions Blackbird from The Beatles, better known as the White Album, a minimalist acoustic song with subtle yet profound social meaning. Then there's Penny Lane, a colorful, nostalgic portrait of Liverpool, Hey Jude with its long choral outro that became a collective ritual for millions of listeners, Yesterday from Help, one of the most covered songs in music history, and Let It Be from the album Let It Be, a hymn-like farewell that closed a monumental era in popular music. In the end, the story of these two so-called filler songs is not a story of failure. It's a story about extraordinarily high standards, about an artist who continuously reevaluates his own work, and about a band that, even in its most routine moments, was still capable of creating music remembered decades later. Because if songs considered mere fillers are still discussed today, imagine just how remarkable the Beatles' greatest achievements truly are.